I'm also being assisted out of sight by my mentor, Jill, who's going to pick up any pieces that I drop. Hopefully I won't drop too many. So the talk tonight is looking at two aspects of Dulwich, looking at North Dulwich, if you like, which would be from the top of Denmark Hill, running down to actually Half Moon Lane. And then the other part is South Dulwich. So I'm looking at Sydenham Hill, stretching down to the South Circular, but there's with one addition which you'll see when we arrive at that part, where it's slightly off of the ridge, as it were. So here we go then. Here we go. Once more, perhaps. So with North Dulwich, we're definitely going to do. Right, that's great. So you can now see, I hope, a field, a small field, and you can see it's the Fox on the Hill. And the little field was called the Triangular Field, obviously, because it is indeed triangular. This is the same little field during or towards the end of the pandemic. We must have relaxed the number of people that can sit having something. So it was really at the end of the pandemic. You can actually see on the left-hand side of the screen, the Fox itself on the hill. And at the back, of course, you can see the Wetherspoons pub, the Fox on the Hill. Now, the Fox, this particular spot is Dulwich's most northerly point. And it's historically of interest because there is a theory that the actual triangular field was used as a burial ground during the Black Death of 1348. Definitely not used as a burial ground for the Great Plague of 1665, but we think there's a possibility it was used as a burial ground for the Black Death, because there are two other places which are identified, which are also open spaces. We're going to see both of those as we go on. And the logic is that the burials took place on the extremity of the manor, and this is one of the extremities of the manor. And here is the same field, a triangular field in the Victorian period. On the left, you can see the road going off there. That is Champion Hill. And to the right, that is Denmark Hill. So you're coming down the hill to King's College Hospital of today. Now, that's the same field, but taken at an angle. So the house that's straight in front of you, the Georgian house straight in front of you, is on Champion Hill itself. Going back to the Fox on the Hill, the Fox on the Hill was actually built as quite an entertainment enterprise by a man, thank you, whose name was Luke Lightfoot. And Luke Lightfoot also built this house in Dulwich Village, still standing, of course, in 1759. And in 1768, he builds Denmark Place as a place of entertainment. And the place of sort of entertainment would be actually as a sort of a meeting facility where dancing could be had and cards, especially whist, could be played. He had great hopes for it. He had this part of this enterprise called Denmark Hall. It had a very large room called the Great Room. He boasted it was the largest room in England, but of course he was full of boasts. We'll go on one. He was a real character, and he was not only an entrepreneur in sort of creating places of entertainment, but he was also, as you see, master carver, surveyor, mason, and carver itself at Claydon House. And Claydon House was the house owned by Lord Verney. And Lightfoot's speciality was actually wood carving. And you can see there some of his wood carving actually at Claydon. If you're in the National Trust, you'll be able to go there and actually see it. And there's a number of rooms in this Chinese style, absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately for Luke Lightfoot, he fell out with Lord Verney. Lord Verney takes him to court and sues him for an enormous amount of money. I think it was about £20,000 for overcharging. And to add to Luke Lightfoot's bad luck, Great Denmark Hall was a failure, and his son, who took over, turned it into the Denmark Hall tea rooms, and then it descended into being broken up into flats, and finally was demolished, and the present pub, the Fox on the Hill, was built. Now, when we look to the little road to the left of the triangular field, you'll see in this picture there was a gate, and there was a gate on the other end of Champion Hill. It was a way to keep the hoi polloi out of these rather grand houses. And we're going to see a couple. This one is called Redholm. Nowadays it has seen better days, but it was built by John Belcher, a distinguished architect, in 1885. It's now divided into 3 different residences, and of course it's in the Tudor style. And this enormous house just past Redholm on Champion Hill, you would probably have passed it and not realise it is now, of course, part of the King's College Hospital Group, and it's accommodation for medical students. But what you see on the screen now, and literally what you will see if you walk past it, was actually the centre block of this house, which was built by, thank you. Sorry, can we go back one? We seem to have lost our back.
Difficult.
Let me do it. Sorry about this. There you go. There in a minute. Right. It was built by a man called Kleinwort, who was a banker, and he bought it in 1885. By 1908, it was totally unfashionable. This whole area had been extremely fashionable, had now become unfashionable. The fact is that London had advanced, especially sort of banging on the doors of rather attractive places like Denmark Hill. There was workmen's tickets being offered for railway fares for the working man. There's nothing wrong with that, but of course, if you were society conscious, you didn't really want lower houses, lower class houses, to be built next to your extremely grand house. In the end, he tried to sell it off to the Dulwich estate as a school, various other things, and it was all declined. The estate itself was getting extremely anxious because of declining property values around this period. And so Mr. Kleinwort took the extraordinary step of actually giving the house away. So he gives the house away to King's College Hospital, and they were expecting to use it as a nurse's home, but it actually became a doctor's, medical students' living facility, and it's greatly enlarged now and extremely attractive. We would come straight down the hill, if we could, from Champion Hill. We've now, of course, got Sainsbury's supermarket in the way, but if we came down to the bottom of the hill, Dog Kennel Hill, we would be standing more or less on St. Francis Park, a little park which has been developed right next to the car park of Sainsbury's. That building that you see at the back there is the Camberwell workhouse, which was built in 1885, I think. And there's a cricket match taking place there, and it's the Brixton Wanderers Cricket Club. I go to the next picture, and there you see the same field. You can just about see the little pavilion on the right of the picture. And on the left, of course, what you can see is Dog Kennel Hill being constructed. And here is the constructed hill with a tram coming down. Hasn't changed too much. We'll go forward to the next picture. Of course, here the tram lines have gone. There were 4 rails before. I was quite familiar with this area. I managed to come down Dog Kennel Hill on a 3-wheeler bicycle, and my parents found me at Goose Green. And I didn't actually improve when I was about 9 or 10, because I managed to roller skate down Dog Kennel Hill. Happily for me, there was a nice great big pile of sand, more or less where that blue road sign is on the left. So I came to a nice stop. And so here is Camberwell Workhouse. Opened in 1892. Sorry, I gave you the wrong date. So it accommodated 1,000 inmates. Mostly they were elderly, infirm, but there was a wing for the mentally ill. In 1937, it was renamed St. Francis Hospital. Some of you may remember it as St. Francis Hospital, and it became the geriatric hospital as part of King's College Hospital. That is, as you see it, was Constance Road, renamed St. Francis Road, and there's a considerable new housing development at the end of St. Francis Road on the actual St. Francis Hospital site. And there we've got a large block of flats called Hambledon Court, named after the chairman of King's College Hospital. And so we have also got Hambledon Place on Dulwich Common. That was named after him as well, because that house there became a nurse's home as well. The Gaumont Film Studios had an outdoor studio on Champion Hill, pretty well just close to the picture we saw a few moments ago of the cricket match. You can see that house at the top was in both pictures. And they made lots of these shorts between 1904 and 1912, and they were all done using daylight. So that's how they got. This is actual picture screenshot, if you like, of one of those films. They're all on paper rolls, and they were always chases. So places like Greendale were extensively used. And here's the present site of what was the field that we were looking at, and that is the second Dulwich Hamlet Football Club stadium. On the left, there is a bronze plaque to Lorraine Wilson. Lorraine Wilson founded Dulwich Hamlet Football Club. There are various accounts of how he started it. One account is he started it from the gymnastic class of St. Barnabas Church and also Dulwich Hamlet School. And Lorraine Wilson was the church warden at Christ Chapel, and he was a great supporter of youth work and made arrangements for the Dulwich Hamlet Football Club in those days, not only to play first of all in Woodward Road and then in the field in Gallery Road, and then move to Sunray Avenue, and then finally to the much bigger ground on Champion Hill. This is then the earlier stadium. This was where Dulwich Hamlet Football Club had its glory days, if you like, and then was replaced by, it was getting a very dilapidated state. And in 1992, Sainsbury's offered the money for a lease, which was sold to Sainsbury's, and they built not only the supermarket, the car park, but also St. Francis Park, and of course the new stadium, which you've just seen. Now we're going back to the top of the hill again. We're going up to the top of Denmark Hill, and these two extraordinary houses built close to each other because they were actually built by two partners in a London company, but were actually sold, the leases were sold to Sir Henry Bessemer. And Sir Henry Bessemer lived on the house on the right there, which was called Bessemer House. And the one on the left, the Grange, he rented or took out a lease as a wedding present for his daughter and his new son-in-law. So he acquired the house on Denmark Hill, Bessemer House, in 1863. He was a prolific inventor. Every day he would be working on all sorts of different inventions. I mean, his most perhaps spectacular and unfortunate one was the ship, which he called the Bessemer, which was a cross-channel steamer, which had a gyroscopically balanced saloon, so it wouldn't theoretically be affected by rough seas. Unfortunately for Bessemer, in its actual maiden voyage, the Bessemer crashed into the pier at Dieppe, and as Bessemer had invited the tabloid press of the day to be witness this wonderful crossing, they rather tore it to pieces. But Bessemer actually sailed, if you like, the prototype model on his lake, actually in the grounds we're going to see in a moment. The building that you see there of Bessemer House is his conservatory. And here is the interior of that conservatory. And there is another view of his daughter's house then, which is called the Grange. Beautiful house, beautiful glass houses there, wonderful grounds. Unfortunately, look now, and this is what it was like in 1945. It was derelict. There was debate whether to keep either the Grange or Bessemer House as a kind of a community centre, the same sort of thing that has been done at Kingswood, but I think it was too far gone. That is the site today of that wonderful pair of houses, and this is part of the Denmark Hill estate. And there we have the Rose Walk, which led down from Bessemer House straight down to the lake at the bottom. And there we have a 1947 construction going on. They're actually laying out the estate, and it runs down the same axis, if you like, as the Rose Walk. The estate itself covers the grounds of not only the two houses, which were made into a hotel and a golf course, but also Ruskin Manor, which is next to it, and we'll see a picture of that in a moment. The combined number of beds that the two hotels could actually offer was 200. So there were substantial enterprises as hotels, and we're looking at about 1925 for that. And so the proceeds of the compulsory purchase of the Denmark Hill and Ruskin Manor estates, of the actual Bessemer estate, all went to the provision of new buildings to replace war-damaged ones at Dulwich College. So there is the same axis as the new road, as the Rose Walk, and there you have the flats, obviously there. There are a considerable number of smaller houses on the estate, which you may not realise there are so many, but there are. So it's not all flats. And there is the Bessemer House itself. You can see the Rose Walk in the middle, and you can see the lake at the bottom. Now, in 1947, or before 1947, it must have been 1946, I went exploring in this area. If you saw the film recently, which was re-shown, called Hope and Glory, about a boy growing up in wartime London during the World War II, yes. This was sort of something of the idea that I was probably rather like the boys in that film. And so this was a magical place because the whole of the Bessemer estate was derelict. The lake at the bottom that you see there was frozen. And I was able to walk across the lake because in the middle of the lake was a man-made grotto. The lake is a man-made lake by Bessemer, but there was a grotto in the middle of the lake. And as it was frozen, I was able to get there and into this grotto, this cave, and the whole of the ceiling was embellished with all different color mosaic stones. It was really magical. In Bessemer's day, he had a fountain operating inside the grotto. And here's some more features of the lake. Bessemer Primary School now covers the lake. It's hard to realize the difference, what we have seen with the reconstruction of Denmark Hill Estate. But of course, we have to realize that there were thousands of people in London that had been bombed out, homeless, or in temporary accommodation. And so Camberwell Borough Council and later London County Council went on a pretty big compulsory purchase scheme throughout Dulwich, and we'll see some more on another occasion. Okay. So that is looking up the Rose Walk to Bessemer House. The lake has been filled in, and that's what it's like today. Bessemer also, he had all sorts of enthusiasms. One was that he had a model farm, and so he had choice animals and so on, and he had various other activities. One of which is the world's second largest observatory, which he built. The telescope was the second largest telescope, I should say, more accurately. And that was on the edge of Greendale. And so you can see this is Greendale, and this is where all of those Gaumont films were, or a lot of the Gaumont films were filmed actually in this road. And there's the observatory, and this is what it is like today. And that is the railings of Bessemer Primary School. And the little path you see on the right of the picture will take you from Greendale to Sainsbury's supermarket. This is a interesting picture because on the left you can see the two houses of the Grange and Bessemer House. And then on the right, you can see Ruskin Manor, not the extreme right, at the top. So it's the third from the left, if you like. It lays back. And Ruskin Manor was extended considerably to make this second hotel in 1925. The building on the right we're going to come to later. It's called Hilltop House. So here's Ruskin's house. The front had a drive up from Denmark Hill, and that is the view from the back. Had a magnificent view over Dulwich. And Ruskin lived there between 1842 and 1872. His father had died, and his mother lived in the house, and he moved in there to after his marriage failed. Earlier he lived just down the road at in Herne Hill, on Herne Hill, I should say. And this is from his autobiography. And so he's writing Praeterita in about 1902 or something like that. And does his memory fail him because he remembers it as a child? Because although he had come back a number of times to stay at the house in Herne Hill, which he still owned and let or gave to his daughter, his niece rather, and her husband, whose name was Arthur Severn, because the time distance between the time he was growing up on Herne Hill and when he was at the age he was in 1902, did his memory fail him? Because once the Crystal Palace arrived, he actually hated it, because he described the Crystal Palace as a blot on the landscape, if you like, something like a sort of a cucumber frame between two upright towers or something like that. He's not very sympathetic towards it at all. But there we are. So here we've got Cleeve Hall. That's the house on the right, and the one on the left is Hillside, I think it's actually called. So Cleeve Hall was compulsory purchase in 1952. That provided 171 homes. And right in the foreground, there's a fountain. You can see it in the picture. And there's the fountain as well. And I remember the fountain really well, because when I was making one of my numerous expeditions as a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old, at the end of the war, this was a magical place as well. So the lake and the grotto were on the other side of the road, Greendale, and on this side there was the overgrown gardens of Cleeve Hall, including this fantastic but overgrown and magical fountain that you see.
No, stop it.
Further along the hill, a little development was taking place. Most of the development, of course, is on the north side of the hill, going down Sunset Road and then Herne Hill Road, those, for example. And so this congregational church provided a place of worship for those houses, not for those on the Dulwich side. But after the end of World War I, there was a great demand for proper housing for those soldiers that had been serving in World War I. And the homes fit for heroes was the slogan. And here we have the estate, which was built on the grounds of casino or casina. You can spell it either way. It was spelled both ways. The grounds that were magnificent and were laid out by Repton, and the lake at the bottom, of course, which Repton laid out, still exists today as a public park. So David Lloyd George's exhortation for we must build homes for heroes as an election pledge was taken up by Camberwell Council, and they actually compulsorily purchased the grounds of Casino and built these actually attractive sort of garden city houses, which we see now, many of which are now turning into private residences and being bought out. Still further along that same ridge, overlooking the Dulwich Valley, we're now on Herne Hill. This was a man who's called Ethel Bicknell, who was a merchant dealing in whale oil. He owned a number of ships which had whaling ports in the Pacific and elsewhere. And he became extremely wealthy, became a collector of Ruskin's pictures. He became friendly with John Ruskin's father, and it became a sort of a definite arts centre for artists and the art-loving people alike. Sadly, that is the sort of scene that house is now, and that's on Herne Hill, and unfortunately is not quite so attractive. And so we're now going to have a look at across the valley at South Dulwich. And here you can possibly not recognise only the fox, but the view. This is the view from Dawson's Heights. You know it perhaps best as Dawson's Height, but it's actually got the two blocks of houses on it are called Ladlands and Primrose Hill. And in even not quite within memory times, but we're in the last century, the remains of a hill fort were visible on the top of Dawson's Height, where that fox was looking across the London scene. This is a similar kind of construction that was actually on Dawson's Heights, or Ladlands, if you like. It was a double ditch fortification, roughly oblong size. The experts of the day thought it was Roman, possibly Iron Age. Some people even thought it was Viking. But from the people I've spoken to, the opinion was it was Roman. And to give a bit more information on, here's the view itself from the Dulwich and Sydenham Golf Club, looking towards the block of flats on which that hill fort was built upon. Unfortunately, it was the time before we had what was known as rescue archaeology by the Museum of London. So we're looking in the 1980s, or 1980s, I think. So the bulldozers just came in and no excavations or anything were actually made at all. And it was all most sad. Here's the sort of shape of the ditch, what happened. There was a parapet behind walls inside, timber walls. There's the double ditch you can see, and the obstacle ditch. And then, of course, in the case we've got, it goes steeply down the view you saw where the fox was. A bit more of evidence of Dulwich and Roman occupation. First of all, Dulwich is named Dilwys, which means the meadow where the dill grew. And it's thought that that Anglo-Saxon name hung on from the Roman period, because the valley where the meadow where the dill grew was an important tip, if you like. It may be that dill was grown commercially in the Roman times, when an excavation was being conducted at the Mansion House area, they found in one of the excavations there were all dill seeds in the kitchen there. So dill was grown, we think, in some sort of amount, some volume to give the area its actual name. Now, this picture you see here are from some objects which are actually in the British Museum. You can go and look at them. There is a better example on display, but what it is, it's a bronze folding tablet engraved with a Roman legionary's discharge details. The Roman legionary has served 20 years in the Roman army. He had got automatic Roman citizenship. The surviving part of the tablet shows the Lingorium cohort of which he was part. And so this was found on Sydenham Hill. So another bit of evidence, was the Roman legionary actually starting a farm in his retirement from the army? Did he bury it for safekeeping for some kind of reason, because there might be incursions by emerging tribes coming over? We don't know the answer to that one. At the top of Sydenham Hill, at the junction between Sydenham Hill and Sydenham Rise, there was a telegraph in 1796, and this offered a very fast means of communication from London, from the actual Admiralty, down to the fleet at Portsmouth. And it was done by a code system on these small buildings where the telegraph operators, which would be operating those screens, they turn on these shutters, turn on ropes. They can dispatch, I think, was the time given to give a message from the Admiralty to Portsmouth was between 4 and 6 minutes, which was pretty fast. So the next one was at Knockholt Beeches. So from here to Knockholt Beeches, that would be the next high point. The operators, the telegraph had telescopes which would pick out the next telegraph along. Looking up Sydenham Hill, there is what we now know as the Horniman Play Park, and that house there, attractive house, was called the Chalet. And we're looking up to the top of Sydenham Hill now. And this is in the 1950s. Here we have that same field where the Chalet was turned into children's playground. We've got a paddling pool, and we've got some humps that were thought were a great idea for what was known as Scandinavian play in the 1950s. They became overgrown. This is the next picture. This is what it is like today if you go to Horniman's Play Park and look towards the site of the Chalet. But we have got an extremely fine children's playground. Contrast that with the number of children in the earlier picture. It's rather disappointing that the actual number of children that go to Horniman's Museum do not cross the road and go into that really good play park just there. They stay in the grounds of the Horniman's itself. Can't run around quite so much there, which is a shame. This, I think, has this cafe at the top of Horniman's Park, I think, has failed. So this is already obsolete. So unfortunately, as I remember, it is now boarded up. Perhaps, hopefully, it will get a new proprietor in due course. We've moved back to the top of Sydenham Hill again, And here we are at the Crystal Palace Parade. We are looking north. What you see at the top of the picture is Dulwich. You'll see Farquhar Road on the left of the picture going down. And this is probably its better days. It had a checkered career, an illustrious start, but as time went on, it became, it was financially always precarious. So this high point in this was about 1920 here, which I think was the Exhibition of Empire. And in November 1936, I was actually present at the burning of the Crystal Palace. Fortunately, I was in a pushchair and I was only 1 month old. So, of course, I've got very, very vivid memories of it. But my mother and father thought it would be an inspirational idea to wheel me from where they were living in Ruskin, near Ruskin Park, onto the top of Denmark Hill to look at the flames across the valley of the Crystal Palace. And there is the sad picture that you see. Today, there are still arguments going on. We are 90 years after the fire. There are still arguments what to do with the Crystal Palace. Here we've got some of the features left, not a lot. The Sphinx and the terraces. On the other hand, people will argue, well, they had some very good pop concerts in the last 3 years. Perhaps things are looking up again. We hope so. Here is a photograph, a very early one, from the bridge, the footbridge in Cox's Walk. And if we look at the next picture, that's the one that was painted by Camille Pissarro when he was living in Penge or Sydenham or in the vicinity of Crystal Palace. And you can see Lordship Lane railway station on the right, but those houses on the left of the railway line are still there. You can see them today. And this is what the high level line, that's the line you were looking at a moment ago, was like when it reached its terminus, the high level station at Crystal Palace. There is the fantastic building on the left of the actual railway station. There is the number of tracks that you can see on the right, now built over by Bowen Drive and a rather nice new housing development, a very attractive one. Up to 80,000 people were transported to the Crystal Palace on the fete days or the bank holidays along that railway, an enormous number. This is the scene today. There on the right is the track of the high-level railway. There on the right is the bridge which Pissarro painted, the picture you saw, which is in the Court Hole Gallery. And the picture on the left shows the tunnel, which is still there in Bowen Drive, and there on the right is literally the modern picture of that rather attractive tunnel. Now, there also at Bowen Drive, we had and still have a foot tunnel that goes from the former railway station under Crystal Palace Parade and actually into the site of the Crystal Palace. And that lay dormant for nearly 90 years. And then the Dulwich Society and other groups and other bodies took an interest in it. And it is not quite completed yet, but it is being restored. That is what it was like, or it will be like at the bottom. And it will be used for events apart from just literally going under the former tunnel. And there you see some of the wonderful mosaic brickwork that was being put in by Barry to embellish that tunnel. It was an inspiration for all those bodies today that have taken part in the fundraising for that to restore it. A brilliant idea. So if we look at the Crystal Palace, we can see it with the railway in front, and there you can see that road, that is Farquhar Road, coming down. On the left is a typical house that was in Farquhar Road, which was demolished or damaged badly in World War II, and consequently those houses were demolished, and it was turned into a park called Dulwich Upper Wood, a splendid small park. I do commend it to you. If you haven't been, it is really worth a visit. It has a warden, and it's managed by the Trust for Urban Ecology. The picture here we're looking at is called Long Meadow. Dulwich Wood Avenue is on the left, Gypsy Hill is on the right. It was being grazed, as you can see, in the Victorian period, effectively beyond the Victorian period into the Edwardian period, and the cows provide milk, which was going to the dairy on Gypsy Hill. Now it's a recreation park. There's some swings at the top, but it's a nice open space, a large open space. Again, it is one of those possible Black Death burial sites. The Horniman Play Park Triangle is the other Black Death possibility site. On Sydenham Hill, there were a wonderful number of houses, magnificent houses built once the Crystal Palace had arrived. And this house, Beech Grove, was lived in by Lionel Logue. And you may have seen the King's Speech. This was the speech therapist that treated George VI, and he lived on Sydenham Hill. And this is his garden today. The house was demolished. There was a real tussle between the Dulwich estate, who wanted to develop it as housing, Southwark Council, who wanted to develop as housing and flats, and the Dulwich Society, and people wanted to keep it as open space. And happily that prevailed, and it is an open space, and the lease is with the Southwark Council. Now, Lionel Logue in World War II was a member of the Dulwich Home Guard, and they had their headquarters at the golf club on the left there at the top of Grange Lane. And it was quite an hilarious, really Dad's Army setup. When one of the lights of a house further down Grange Lane, there's only one house down there, and that's the one. When the occupants left the lights on and couldn't be roused, then the Home Guard soldiers came down and shot the lights out with their .303 rifles. I don't suppose that enamored them to the owner of the house much. The house, unfortunately, the clubhouse itself was hit by a V1 flying bomb in World War II. And that is the current house that has replaced it, which is there today. Now we come to Dulwich Wood House, because Dulwich Wood House and Crescent Wood Road was a development which was carried out, as was some other roads like Dulwich Wood Avenue, and also some of Dulwich Wood Park, which was called Victoria Road, by the Crystal Palace Company. So when the Crystal Palace Company finished building the Crystal Palace, or transferring it from Hyde Park and enlarging it to the size it was, they also took options on a lot of the land around. And Crescent Wood Road was built on, and here we've got on the left one of those houses built post Crystal Palace, as was the Dulwich Wood House. And on the right, we have an interesting 1930s house by the Lubetkin Partnership in the Art Deco style. Next to the wood house, there is Beltwood House, which has been restored by developers, and they have built numerous attractive and expensive houses in the large grounds of Beltwood House. Coming down the hill, we are at Kingswood House, and here we see it in 1900. Not a great difference to if you see it today, except the ivy's been removed. But here we see Kingswood House being used by William Johnston, who was the inventor of Bovril, who turned a pretty mundane Georgian house into a flamboyant baronial sort of house. He invited Sunday school groups and other groups of young people for picnic days in the grounds of Kingswood. And so here we see it today, looking very good. And it's been taken over by a new trust who are running it as an art trust, which is exciting. And so Johnston, as I say, invented Bovril and made his fortune from that product, came from Scotland. And the house was sold in 1919, following Johnston's death, to Sir William Vesty. William Vesty actually for a time also lived at Bessemer House, and Vesty was the owner of the Blue Star Line. And so on the right you can see the Blue Star Line, which was operated a number of ships which had cold storage facilities, and Vesty had big interest, or the Vesty family, and still has very big interest in the cattle business in Argentina. And so those two were the quite well-known occupants of Kingswood. On the other side of the road, just down a little bit, was Woodhall, and that was the home of James Crossley Eno, and he was the inventor of Eno's liver sorts, or fruit sorts. And he always, not only did he sort of have a design influence on the advertising, but he also wrote all of the advertisements. So they were pretty flamboyant adverts. His fruit sorts would cure almost any ailment under the sun. It was bought out, the actual name of the liver sorts was fruit sorts rather, was bought out by I forget, GKN, I think it is. I've forgotten the name of the big pharmaceutical company, but only about 2 or 3 years ago, in fact, they've dropped the product from its inventory of products it has. So I'm afraid you won't get those fruit sorts now. And we come down now to the end of our route, really, to St. Stephen's, St. Peter's Church on the corner of Lordship Lane and Dulwich Common, or now called the South Circular. And there you can see Cox's Walk right in front of you to the right of the church. And that is the scene today, looking very lovely. The Dulwich Society has opened a listening post just on the right there. It's well worth a listen if you go past. And there, as you can see, St. Peter's Church at the back. We're in the same field, if you like, that there's a cricket field next to St. Peter's Church. And here we have the Home Guard for Dulwich, before they were being their passing out, or this being disbanded, I suppose. So this was their farewell do for the Dulwich Home Guard. And there's the field that was taken from, back a bit more. In that field, of course, there were rocket launchers operated by the regular army as an anti-aircraft exercise, and also some heavy anti-aircraft guns up by the golf course. There is a war memorial next to St. Peter's Church. You can see it there on the right. And it is to the war memorial to the Dulwich Volunteer Battalion, 1914-1919. And it was known as the Dulwich Defence League, became known generally as the Volunteer Battalion. They would take all volunteers with, it was an early sort of home guard. It would take young people that would hopefully then go into the regular army of 1914 to 19. And it had about 1,000 members, so a pretty considerable number. And that is their cat badge. And this is our last picture. And this shows Highwood Barracks, which is just was up from St. Peter's Church. You'll see those soldiers there are Royal Logistics Regiment. It was demolished rather in 2002, built in 1938, just before World War II was to start. An interesting thing about that photograph is if you look at the sign, it says 21st Special Air Service Regiment. So this was the SAS actual barracks. That was the SAS volunteers. So these were TA, Territorial Army, for the SAS, but they were there for some years, and even came down to the gingerbread fair that used to take place in what is now the Orchard in Dulwich Village, where they would display their Land Rovers and so on. And of course, after the IRA action against British Army soldiers in uniform, they went sort of incognito. And so everything became secret for the SAS, including even the TA unit. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this evening. I hope that at the end in the autumn, I might do another then and now, which would be east to west Dulwich, looking through the valley of Dulwich. But thank you for joining me.